Aaron, if you want to join us up here again, I'm not sure we were through putting you on the hot seat yet. We'll make sure we're finished before we let you off the hook.
Mr. Chairman, I'm finished with my remarks. If there's any other questions I can answer, I'd be happy to try to do so.
All right, I think we're gathering here slowly but surely. All right, does anyone else have any questions for Erin before we let her off the hot seat? Well, I wasn't quite sure if we should, if we were finished with you yet, Erin, so I thought I'd better give people an opportunity to take one last shot at you before we released it. So thank you for your presentation, and
Thank you. Best time at the mic I've had.
All right, we're still open for public comment. Anyone else ready? Yes, commissioners. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Ben Moritz, Deputy Director of the Community College Commission. And with me is Larry Buchholz, Chief Financial Officer. We don't really have a lot to say. I think Ms. Taylor really talked about the importance of sustainable funding. It's been an ongoing challenge. The legislature has made that a priority, and the Sustainable Funding Committee did a lot of great work. I know that information has been presented to numerous legislators by Ms. Taylor and Dr. Caldwell and Mr. Buchholz. And so we feel that this will make a significant step towards providing that sustainable funding piece that the colleges do need. One thing that I would point out is that when there are one-time funds such as the ARP funds that are being discussed right now, it's hard to make long-term sustainable choices for the colleges. And so any form of sustainable funding that can allow them to have the knowledge that in the future they can continue to fund, whether it's faculty lines or it's student support lines or anything like that is very important. I mean, it's similar to how a small business would be run. If that business knows from year to year how much funding will come in, it can make a lot more decisions and more long-term planning. As you may know, last year, the Wyoming Community College System, lowercase s, was ranked the #1 community college system in the country. This year, we were ranked #2, which is still quite good. One of the reasons why we are so highly ranked is because we have very high completion ratings. And one of the main reasons for that is because the colleges do a great job of providing wraparound services to the students to make sure that especially rural and first generation students have the supports that they need. When funding isn't available or it's only one-time special project funding, it makes it difficult to hire advising folks, counselors, tutors, those types of ongoing commitments. And so with an item like this sustainable funding legislation, anything that can provide a little bit more certainty allows the colleges to plan more in the future and of course, better serve their students as they have been able to do up to this point. So I would stop there and answer any questions. And afterwards, I'm sure Mr. Buchholz probably has some more specific financial information to share.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Two related questions. Who did the ranking and who beat us out for #1? And let me say, I do think that the rankings accord with reality, but I'm interested.
Mr. Chairman, I can answer the first one, but not the second one. Wallet Hub does the ranking. I know it's not a household name, but it is essentially the only entity out there that is doing that for community colleges. And US News and World Report does piggyback on that research. So they'll acknowledge that as well. But, you know, I didn't check. Do you know off the top of your head? Hawaii.
But other than that.
Okay, any other comments, questions from the committee? Oh, we do have some. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Larry Buckhold, CFO, the Community College Commission. I'd like to start by addressing the questions by Co-Chairman Scott and by Representative Summers related to a previous endowment matching program that the legislature did. And in fact, your memory is correct, Senator Scott. The last time it was done, there was an amount of money for each community college to match, and it had an end date. And if the college didn't match it by that end date, then any other college in the system could match it and get that funding. So that did happen. There were colleges that didn't have the ability to match because of their own local resources, alumni contributions, business, industry, those types of things. So that did happen in the past. So if there's any other questions about that, I can try to answer those also. The other thing that I want to impart on the committee is what will happen with funding, and more specifically, the funding allocation model, should this legislation pass and should there be future one-time distributions to the system. Currently in rules, it's written that one-time appropriations for anything other than enrollment growth, and enrollment growth appropriations have gone away. Those were done away with when House Bill 80 back in 2016 was implemented. And we do recalibration now, which considers enrollment as part of that change to the base funding to the system. All other one-time appropriations, and this would be a one-time appropriation every single session, by taking that report from the treasurer's office and seeing how much money is available and then making that appropriation to the system. What we would do on our side is we would distribute that to the institutions based on their current proportional share of the fixed costs of the funding allocation model. So there would be no consideration of enrollment, weighted credit hours, successfully completed degrees and certificates. That's on the variable side of the funding allocation model. If you recall the presentation that we did up in Casper, there's that 60-40 split on the state aid block grant that goes to the institutions. 40% is peeled off for variable costs, 60% is peeled off for their fixed cost. So whatever their proportional allocation of the state aid block grant is in that year that an appropriation is made from enactment of this legislation, that's how it would get distributed to the colleges. It would also have an impact on recapture redistribution. It's just an adjunct to the funding allocation model, this additional funding. So I just wanted to give you an understanding of how this money, should it come to fruition, how that would be distributed to the institutions.
Okay. Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Well, honestly, that doesn't sound like it's the way we would want it to be. If this is going to be an ongoing distribution where we basically have a spending policy amount that is distributed based on revenue availability in the long run, we would want that to reflect that. Am I mistaken? In the long run, would we want it distributed more according to the other percentage of the algorithm or not?
I really hate to admit this, but I hardly heard a thing you said.
Oh, my apologies. I might not have been very close to the microphone. It seems like if we want ongoing funding, and this is as an endowment in the long run, as opposed to a one-time, it's an endowment that produces an ongoing series of one-time, as you said. The reality is it should look more like a spending policy where we have a steady revenue stream. And it seems like it would be more appropriate for it to be distributed through not the fixed cost algorithm, but the ongoing expenditure algorithm side of the equation. Am I missing something there?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, It's a block grant. At the end of the day, it's a block grant. So we would do the distribution based on the way rules are currently written by the proportional share of what the fixed costs are at each of those institutions. But at the end of the day, once that money gets into the bank at the institution, they can spend it however they want. It is not required to be spent just on fixed costs. We don't restrict them to saying this allocation that you're going to get can only be spent on utilities, can only be spent on X, Y, or Z. It's a block grant.
Right. Mr. Chairman, follow up?
Follow up?
Yeah, I understand that that's how it can be done, but as far as the appropriate distribution mechanism, I don't know that the fixed cost side of the equation is the appropriate distribution mechanism, and that's what I'm asking. Honestly, it seems to me that the credit hour weighting side would be the more appropriate distribution, and if we have it the opposite way in statute, I think that's a real important policy decision for us to, first of all, understand deeply, and then second of all, discuss. And it might be a balanced weighting of the two. It might be 60-40. I don't know, but I certainly didn't anticipate that as I was contemplating this draft. So it's important for us to realize what the implications of that are.
Co-Chairman Scott?
Mr. Chairman, I would hope we would stay out of the distribution using this bill. I think that if we can get the endowment passed, and then we're looking at what we might actually get out, then we have to start thinking about some of that sort of thing. I think if you get into an argument about how to distribute it, you will kill the bill. I think that would be just inevitable. And frankly, my concern is more that the Appropriations Committee will use the money strictly to supplant general fund expenditures, and that's a battle we're going to have to fight in the nature of things every 2 years in the budget.
Mr.
Senator
Chairman,
Rothfuss?
to address that, we do get into the distribution argument because we effectively have drafted it in a way that it distributes through the fixed cost instead of through the student. So it's my understanding based on your read that it's drafted as a series of one-time distributions instead of ongoing distributions. That's a decision. I mean, that's not, well, we're staying out of the distribution process. That is electing into a specific distribution algorithm that may not be the right algorithm. It could be go with the 40%, it could be go with the 60%, or it could be an appropriate distribution through the 60-40 mechanism. Any of those are on the table, and I think this is the kind of decision that we should go into the legislative session if we support this legislation, knowing how it's going to be distributed and be able to defend that, because there's no way we can avoid that debate. This bill does not avoid that debate. It just chooses, and it chooses, honestly, of the three possibilities, I would say it chooses the least appropriate of the three possibilities, whether it's the 40, the 60, or a direct distribution through the 60-40 split. What are your thoughts on which one might be the most appropriate, recognizing you're probably just doing it off the cuff?
Mr. Chairman. I think that the legislature, or this committee in particular, might have the latitude to tell us that it'll be distributed on the variable side, if that's the desire of the committee. I think that there's also an opportunity maybe to draft this in a way that it adds to the state aid block grant, not that it is a separate appropriation to be distributed outside of the block grant. And if you did that, then it would be just as if there was a supplemental appropriation or an addition to the regular block grant, and it would go 60-40 all the way across the board.
Representative Summers?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I appreciate that. You're kind of dancing around. Obviously, there's winners and losers, right? Either way you do it, some community colleges will win and some community colleges will lose. And so my question to you is if we leave it like it is now, which community colleges win? I would assume it's based just on the conversation, it's the smaller population. Maybe, and then and then if you went the other way, the larger population colleges would be the winner. Is that fair?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, it actually is the opposite. It's not on student population. It's on how much local revenue that a college district collects. Because the more local revenue they get, the less state aid they get. So we would proportionalize the distribution on the state aid portion of the fixed costs that they receive in the funding allocation model. So Eastern Wyoming College would get proportionally more than Laramie County Community College, Western Wyoming Community College, those that have the largest local revenue intake.
Mr. Co-Chair?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, frankly, I think this is really a red herring. The language is funds in the account shall be expended upon legislative appropriation. I think that the terms of the appropriation are what's going to govern the distribution. And I think that's the way it should be in this bill. So I don't think you can assume from anything in this bill how the appropriation will distribute that money. And I think that's the appropriate way to approach it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Anyone else? Comments? Committee? Okay, thank you for your testimony. Public testimony still open? We have anyone else? The audience? Anyone online? Anyone online? Okay. We'll close public testimony.
Move the bill.
Bill has been moved. Is there a second? Moved and seconded.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Page 5. Delete the $100 million and insert $1,000. Again, a token appropriation, so that we can have flexibility to determine it later when we have better knowledge.
Okay, is there a second to the amendment? Okay. Questions, comments? Sensing you're ready to vote, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Amendment carries.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Second Amendment, this one's been distributed. It's, what it does is it removes the piece about the special projects expenditure account and leaves us with just all the money going into the state aid expenditure account. And Mr. Chairman, this is a matter of philosophy. My thought is that what we're trying to achieve here is stability in funding for the basic operating expenses of the community college system. And that the special projects piece is kind of a red herring in that special projects in their nature are special. You fund them when you've got particularly one-time appropriations that you can use. And in the years when you are tight on money, you don't fund them unless there's something arises that's absolutely critical. So I think we're much safer and have a simpler bill by having just concentrating on the operating side, which is where the real need, as I see it, is. So, Mr. Chairman, that's what the amendment does, and I do move it.
Okay. Got a motion and a second. Everyone clear? I'm assuming that everyone has a copy of the amendment. Everyone clear on the amendment? Any questions? Comments? Okay, sensing you're ready to vote, all in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, nay. The amendment carries. Who's next? Other amendments?
Chairman, I'm gonna wait, but I want to just tell the committee, when this comes to House Education, when and if, right? That I really want to put in some of this whole expenditure count, endowment type, spending policy amount. And then I think it makes it a real consistent amount. So, the community colleges are going to know what they're going to get every year. And so that's my intent, but not now. I'll have it drafted and you guys know the workings of it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any other comments?
Question.
Question's been called. Roll call vote, I guess, isn't it?
On 22 LSO 0108 as amended. Senator Beitman. Senator Ellis. Senator Rothfuss.
Aye.
Senator Salazar. Representative Andrew. Representative Connolly. Representative Harshman. Representative Nyman. Representative Newsom. Representative Obermueller. Representative Summers. Co-Chairman Scott.
Aye.
Chairman Paxton.
Aye.
14 aye.
Okay. Looks like we're moving right along. This is
Personal
1:30 on
privilege,
Tuesday.
personal privilege. Mr.
Personal
Chairman.
privilege, Representative Obermueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's a community college funding source that's coming through a different committee. So I just wanted to make the public and the committee aware of that bill so that they can look at it, become aware of it, and weigh in on it when it comes to a different committee. The item is 8-2. It's in the Transportation Committee meeting on November 29th and 30th. What the bill does, the problem it is trying to solve for the community colleges is the $94 million cuts in the last 10 years. So this bill will be a partial fix to that. This bill takes the 1% statutory severance tax, which is currently distributed to inviolate funds, and allocates the money to support two major economic drivers in the state, the construction industry and community colleges. Severance taxes have an intergenerational characteristic, Mr. Chairman, and the support and the development of the construction industry and their training partner community colleges is certainly a significant part of that intergenerational aspect. As to leveraging severance tax dollars for greater impact, recycling those dollars back through the business community and investing in an educated workforce, to me, is a great way to maximize the leverage potential of those dollars, especially considering that the inviolate funds would still have their own constitutional piece, their 1.5% funding source. So, Mr. Chairman, that's all I really have to say. My purpose here today is just to bring awareness to that bill to the public in this committee so that you all have a chance to look at it and weigh in time. So it's item 8-2 posted to the November, it's currently posted to the November 29-30 transportation meeting, which you can find at the in the agenda section going to the legislative website. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to allow a couple of comments here to Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, just a question. I think, so the money's split between community colleges and the road system in Wyoming, right? That's because you said construction, but I assume that was construction of roads.
Generally speaking, that's true, although that money would be, in my vision of it, would be funneled through WYDOT, but their mission is much wider than roads. So theoretically, it could be buildings, aviation, whatever their purview is. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the information. Well, believe it or not, the next item on our agenda is a consideration of the Hathaway Scholarship, which is to be considered at 1:30 on Tuesday, and it's 1:35. So somehow or another, we kind of caught up. So, so LSO, if you're ready, we're ready for you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Tanya Heydrich, Legislative Service Office. As you mentioned, the next item is the Hathaway Scholarship Amendments Bill. That bill is 22 LSO 104 Working Draft 6. You'll recall from your previous meeting that the intent of this bill is to increase the scholarship amounts across the board. As a result of the committee action at the last meeting, it does eliminate the reserve account and merges that with the expenditure account. It also increases the amount retained in the expenditure account before the transfer back to the endowment and allows for investment in Pool A. We can go ahead and walk through the bill on page 2, beginning at line 4, onto page 3, line 5. This is the conforming amendment that's required as a result of allowing the investment of this expenditure account into Pool A. Moving on to lines 7 on page 3 onto page 4, line 21. This is where you'll see the merging of the two accounts and allowing of investment in Pool A. This section was modified as a result of the last meeting. You'll note that the amount retained is now 9% of the 5-year average market value of the Hathaway Student Scholarship Endowment Fund. That will be retained within the expenditure account for purposes of payment of the scholarships. Moving on to page 5, lines.
Co-chair?
Mr. Chairman, question on this section, the 9% figure, and I can recall debate of using a 6% figure. And probably my question is for Matt. I know we discussed this at the last meeting, and Mr. Chairman, I flatly do not understand the implications of 9% as opposed to a lower number. And so I'm going to have another try at understanding it, Mr. Chairman.
Matt, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman and Chairman Scott, so the current law is 4.5%, which is about $27.4 million. Increasing it to 9% doubles that amount to $54.8 million.
Okay, what is, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Okay, 27 million, 54 million, I understand what that is, but what's the account? What's the implications of it?
Sure. So, Mr. Chairman, the implications is this. Current law directs the state treasurer's office to transfer any funds retained in the reserve account at the end of the fiscal year in excess of $27 million, or 4.5% of the 5-year market average, to the corpus. Increasing it to 9% retains an additional $27 million in the reserve, or now the expenditure account. So it allows for more funds to be retained in your reserve account. It lowers the amount that would have been transferred to the corpus.
More chances in how much we spend, because if we have a dip in the income, we have more reserves to cover. Is that a correct understanding?
Mr. Chairman, your increased expenditure account or reserve account allows for greater opportunity in years where your investment earnings are lower than anticipated to cash flow those awards. Also, currently your reserve account is invested in the state agency pool. It does not provide the opportunity for the treasurer's office to invest those in a more aggressive fund. And Mr. Sackett from the treasurer's office is here. He could speak to this in a little bit more detail, but the gist of it is your current amount of 4.5% essentially cash flows your Hathaway expenditure account, because you zero it out at the end of the fiscal year. Then you have to transfer funds from the reserve account. That's the first reason why you're merging the accounts. you're still going to have to cash flow the expenditures to the community colleges and university at the beginning of the fall semester because your investment earnings come over the course of the entire fiscal year. Allowing a larger amount to be retained in your reserve or expenditure account allows the state treasurer's office to potentially invest these in investments that could potentially earn higher interest rates in the current state agency pool. And I think Mr. Sackett can get into a little bit more detail whether or not 9% is appropriate or 6% or somewhere in between. At what point does it allow the state treasurer's office to continue to cash flow, but also retain an amount to be invested in pool A? So I'll leave it at that.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead.
following up on that last sentence. My understanding is that we are allowing this fund or a portion of it to be invested in pool A, and that somewhat mitigates the loss of income that we would get if it was transferred back into the corpus.
Mr. Chairman, exactly.
Thank you very much.
Okay, proceed, please.
Mr. Chairman, the remainder of the bill is pretty straightforward. Page 5, lines 6 and 7. This is where you'll see an increase in the Hathaway Opportunity Scholarship from $840 to $885. Moving on to page 6, lines 6 through 8. This is an increase in the Hathaway Performance Scholarship from $1,260 to $1,325. Page 6, lines 19 through 21 increases the Hathaway Honor Scholarship from $1,680 to $1,765. Moving on to page 7, lines 18 and 19, this increases the Provisional Opportunity Scholarship from $840 to $885. At the bottom of page 7, you'll see the need-based scholarship, and on to page 8, lines 21 through 23. This modifies the need base, increasing the maximum award from $1,575 to $1,655. Moving on to page 9, lines 3 through 5, this increases the minimum award for the need-based scholarship from $105 to $110. On page 9, line 17, this is a conforming amendment required as a result of the elimination of the reserve account. On page 10 and on to page 11, you'll note the 2 statutory provisions that are repealed. The first, 2116-13B, is the reserve account, and that is eliminated. In 2116-1309B, Romanet 3 also references the reserve account. There's one technical amendment that staff would draw your attention to. Romanets 1 and 2 under subsection B also reference payment related to an 80% for the honors, performance, and the opportunity scholarships, with 20% being reserved for the needs base. If you look on the page 3, lines 14 through 19, that language is deleted and has been inoperable in operation of the program since its inception. And so staff would ask the committee to authorize, in addition to repealing Romanet 3, appealing Romanets 1 and 2 as well, although they're not listed in this bill draft. Page 11, lines 13 through 16 transfers the funds that are unobligated and unencumbered in the Hathaway Scholarship Reserve account to the Hathaway expenditure account. And you'll note on line 18, this act is effective July 1st of 2022. Subject to your questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, questions for Matt or Tanya from the committee? Okay, seeing none, I think we'll see if Mr. Sackett from the Treasurer's Office would like to make some comments before we open it up to the public. Welcome.
Chairman Paxton, Chairman Scott, members of the committee, Matt Sack with the Treasurer's Office. Mr. Wilmarth did a very nice job of explaining the increase from 4.5% to 9% and what that generally does. Maybe I'll start with a couple potential notes that I had on the bill. And I defer to LSO on this, but the top of page 3, there's a long list of accounts that shall be invested into Pool A. So the Hathaway expenditure account is included in that, and that language says shall be invested. Later on in page 3, it discusses that the expenditure account may be invested in the Pool A investment pool. So there might be some type of conflict there. If we're told we shall or we may, those are, as you guys all know, very different mechanisms for us. I think. Go ahead.
Co-chair?
Could you repeat those line numbers where those are?
Yeah, on page 3 of the bill, on line 1. Monies in the following funds shall be invested in the Pool A investment account. And then there's a very long list, and we're adding to the end of that list with line 4 XVI that says the Hathaway Scholarship Expenditure Account. And then at the bottom of page 3, on line 20, it says funds within the expenditure account may be invested in the Pool A account by the treasurer's office pursuant to .
Follow up?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, following up. So the one at the top of page 3 is existing law and governs quite a number of accounts. So if we wanted to be consistent, we would delete from the bill the stuff at the top of page 3 and just go with the may language down on the bottom of page 3 if we wanted the treasurer to have some option.
Chairman Paxton, Chairman Scott. There might be a number of ways to do this, and this might depend on the policy that, you all make. This kind of ties into Mr. Wilmar's discussion of the size of the reserve and our ability to invest in Pool A. If you tell us we shall, of course, we would put all of it in there. I think.
Mr. Chairman, what my thought is that you might well decide it's rational to invest part of it in Pool A and have some that you're gonna need for immediate expenditure in the agency pool, which is set up for that sort of thing. So that maybe the May language is more appropriate, because that would give you the ability to divide it, would it not?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, that would be my understanding. And I think for cash flowing purposes of payments to the university and community colleges, we would want to hold some of that in a more liquid state. This also ties into, maybe for a little leeway here on this discussion, the 4.5% to 9%, size of that reserve. Talking to CIO Fleming a number of times on this, what you generally want before you invest, say, more aggressively or, into more equities and other items like Pool A would, you want at least a 5-year spend. If we look at historical expenditures out of the account, it's been around 18 million. If we pass an increase, maybe that rounds up to around 20 million per year in expenditures. A 5-year spend would be 100 million in the account. But the important thing is the consideration of the yield, the income, interest, and dividends that we received during the year, which Ms. Hoag did a very good job of explaining in her memo from, I think, the August meeting, where she discussed we are receiving, interest and dividends that do help pay a large portion of that cost. So looking at the size of the balance and what our Craig estimate on yield for the Hathaway is 2%. I think there was 670 million in the Hathaway as of one of our later portfolio totals. That'd give us 12.5, $13 million per year in yield paying for this. So that means we're somewhere around 7.5 million coming out of investments and potentially the reserve. So basically you're looking at a 30 $7.5 to $40 million reserve account size for us to invest at least portions of that in the LSR or into Pool A. As that size grows, that would allow us to invest more, to Chairman Scott and Senator Office's points of allow us to invest more and offset maybe some of the allow us to invest more into Pool A and increase the returns and offset some of that saving that is not going into the corpus. So I don't know if I confused that more or less, but
Okay,
we need around, so 40 million might be the number that we would invest in Pool A because we are getting income and dividends through the year. Timing of those is always dependent just on our asset allocation and investments.
Mr. Co-Chair?
Further technical question. If we were to eliminate the may down on page 3 and just go with the shall that's at the top of page 3, would that force you to put the whole account into Pool A?
Mr. Chairman, not being a lawyer, I would say that it will. Every other account on that list, the entire account is invested into Pool A.
Senator Office.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. LSO worked with Representative Harshman to put together a little subject to clause that would go in front of Romanet 16. Romanet 16 needs to be there to authorize the use of Pool A for a specific investment. That's the purpose of this provision of statute. So we can't just delete it, but we want the may clause. So I think there'll be a proposed amendment in a little bit that will solve that.
Okay. Proceed. Do you have anything more? Or-
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, so after all that, Matt, you like the 9% based upon the Pool A.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, 9% is fine. It could be maybe somewhat lower and still give us some of that flexibility, but 9% is comfortable for us.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Anyone else? Yes.
Mr. Sackett, and then do you like the one account? I mean, the problem has been the sweeping and then flowing back issue, and then we've created this, the Hathaway doesn't have enough money talk, which is not the case. So I like the way we've set this up, one account.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, yes, this, hearkening back to the previous discussion, yes, when the reserve account really in the past has only been used to decide whether we tipped into the corpus or not. And we take all the money from the income account, put it into the reserve account, and then put it back in the income account, back and forth. And I know Mr. Harshman said, left pocket, right pocket, left pocket, right pocket. That is very true. So yes, we are supportive and we can calculate whether there is a tip from the expenditure account just as easily as the reserve account.
Thank you.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Chairman. With the yield, to say the permanent mineral trust fund or our permanent funds generally.
That's a good question. I would have to talk to CIO Fleming about that. I would say they're probably not hugely different just because the yields are so low now. Although interest rates are, as you've seen probably recently, are starting to creep up a little bit. That might have a larger effect on the future difference in yield between, say, PMTF, Pool A. The big difference is really kind of SAP versus the rest, state agency pool. But I would imagine between Pool A and permanent mineral, it's not a large number.
Okay. Further questions? Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. This isn't relevant for now, but just anticipating and looking forward to when we might be looking at this on the floor. It would be really handy for us to do a backward projection. Imagine if we enacted this 10 years ago and just lay out, this is what it would look like. So that we can see the differential yields and the amount of additional revenue that would have been generated and what the balance of the the Hathaway would be at this point, if all else was unchanged, but we'd implemented this a decade ago. I think that'll just be handy for us to show it to folks on the floor. Hey, this is what we're talking about.
ahead.
Mr. Chairman, quick clarification. If we invested in the pool A with the reserve account, is the gen.
Exactly. And to be honest, I guess we can't go back 10 years, but to the beginning of the pool.
Mr. Chairman, I can work with LSO and we can come up with some, maybe it's partly PMTF or something at some point, but.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay. I think you're off the hot seat.
Thank you, guys.
Good to see you, Matt.
Okay, public comment is open. Anyone else? Public comment? Anyone online for public
No, sir,
comment?
there's not.
Okay,
I think. Get up there.
okay. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Lisa Johnson with Wyoming Association for Career and Technical Education. I think, and we've got some of our members here in the audience that some of you have been able to meet. We're not asking for any changes to this bill. We are supportive of some of the amendments that we believe are coming later. And the reason behind that is the legislature has supported changes to the Hathaway that provide the scholarship funding to be more equitable and flexible for students in career and technical education programs to use those funds. And at one of your previous meetings, we talked about the need for or the desire to be able to use that scholarship for apprenticeship programs too. And so I don't know if this was exactly the right time to bring that up, but we are in support of additional programs like the Hathaway Scholarship, the earlier programs that you talked about that just get more people involved in career and technical education programs so that we have more workers available to serve our economy needs.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thanks for letting me point you to get up there on the seat. So in the break, in my amendment, I provide a one-time $885 shot. But then in talking to you, there's an apprentice program. I'd like you to go over what that apprentice program is and how much it costs for how many semesters or quarters or whatever it is, just so I understand now what the real cost of a accredited apprentice program is, or no, I guess it's not credited, but it's an apprentice program in a community college.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that question, Representative Summers. There are a variety of different apprenticeship programs, and so we would like to continue to get more information about those. But one example that we are aware of is at Casper College, there's an electrical apprenticeship program, and the cost per semester is about $790 a semester, and that's an 8-semester program. So while we're excited to see the potential for having this apprenticeship program established and funded at that level, it would provide part of the funding that's necessary for that particular program. And we're sure that there's other programs at other colleges around the state too. So we would like to get you more information about the costs at the different apprenticeship programs, so you could see how much of the educational cost would be met through that scholarship.
We would appreciate that. Yes, follow up.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And it's my understanding currently with this Hathaway Scholarship, that would not be able to be utilized to provide money. In other words, a kid couldn't use the Hathaway to access that program, right? That curriculum.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, I might not be the best person to answer that question. Perhaps Dr. Moritz could answer that better. That is my understanding, but I know that he would have a lot better information about that question.
Okay. Anyone else? Questions for Lisa? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any other? Yes. Welcome again.
Mr. Chair and committee members, I am Kyle Moore from the University of Wyoming. I serve as the Vice Provost for Enrollment Management. I'm here to say that we as the university support this bill. In particular, we're in support of some of the amendments that will be presented by Senator Ellis. They may seem like very small tweaks to dollar amounts, but what it does for students is allows us to communicate their award amount more effectively and succinctly. And it will also result in a much easier processing implication at the financial aid level for all the institutions of higher education. So we simply want to say that we appreciate the work on this bill. And while some of these things seem very nominal, they have big impacts to our students and our colleges and university. So we appreciate the recognition of the members to support those amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? All right, thank you for your comments. Anyone else? Yes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Ben Moritz, Deputy Director, Community College Commission. You're probably getting tired of seeing me so far today. So I won't say too much other than to second what Kyle Moore said. Raising the amounts helps keep up with inflation. It's important so that we can continue to provide these opportunities for our students. The Senator Ellis amendment and changing those amounts, it does make a difference, whether it's divisible by 12 or not, and taking into account dividing out those credit hours does save a lot of time and headache and makes things a lot easier, not only for the colleges, but for the students. But most importantly, is just having the money there to provide those opportunities for the students. So that's all I have, unless anybody has any questions.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I may have this a little wrong, but it's a perception out there. And I'm totally in support of this. But we go out and raise the Hathaway, and then are you gonna automatically, or will colleges automatically backfill with a tuition increase? And then in other words, the student really never gains any more buying power. They still are in the same hole they are. You're just raising rates based upon the fact that we're raising a scholarship. I'll tell you, I'm telling you that is because that's really bad optics going forward.
Senator Office.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. You know, so that he doesn't have to respond, I'll respond. Everyone's raising tuition. They already were. It is going to be a greater increase than what we're giving because the increase we're giving is tiny relative to the increasing cost of education. The Hathaway purchasing power has gone down 30% since Senator Scott put it in place. It is bad optics, but at the same time, it's just the reality. The university trustees, and Kyle's probably here somewhere. There he is, hiding behind the pillar. I don't know if everyone chooses these spots just so they can't spot them or what, but the trustees already have a schedule in place that will eclipse this increase, and it has nothing to do with this legislation. I don't know what the commission's doing, but I'm sure the commission also has a schedule already in place that will eclipse these increases. So it's bad optics, but part of that is that we just haven't kept up. Now, if we said, you know, we're going to fully fund it and they came back with 10%, I guess I'd be sympathetic to them gaming us a little bit on that. But the reality is we're just doing a bad job of keeping up with the cost of tuition and have for as long as I've been in the legislature. This is not the first time we've talked about this, but so that he doesn't have to say it. Yes, he is going to increase tuition. Yes, the university is going to increase tuition. I don't know when.
Would you like to answer for yourself this time?
Well, I kind of like having a senator answer for me. That's nice. But no, I would say, well, first of all, I don't have nearly as much power as you're saying, that our commissioners obviously make that choice. But we have adopted a policy where we try to keep the tuition as a certain percentage of the total amount of revenue that's coming in, that proportion between state aid, the mill levies, and then the tuition. And as those other numbers change, it sometimes requires that tuition number to change. And so that's really what's driving those decisions. Of course, the guidance from that calculation is then presented to the commissioners with input from the presidents. And this last time that came up, the guidance in that formula said, okay, according to these formulas, you should increase tuition. But it was just not the time and the place to do it. And so we held that flat. But I mean, costs do continue to go up, and so tuition probably will too. And you know, I'm aware that those optics are definitely unfortunate. But you know, I would also second what Senator Rothfuss says. The overall value of the Hathaway Scholarship in comparison to general cost of living is not quite stayed even.
Okay, other questions from the committee? Yes, Representative Harshman.
Mr. Chairman, and has that, you referred to that percentage of state funding, local funding and tuition? Is that, as I recall, that was originally target was 60, 20, 20. Is that what you're referring to? 60% state aid?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, yes, that was a rough estimate about where we would like to be. It is not at those numbers right now. The state funding, unfortunately, Mr. Buckholz had to leave, but I believe our state funding is around 56% at this point, and tuition has moved up 23, 24%. And, you know, comparisons get made to other states, and we should be at this level or we should be at this level. But frankly, every state is unique. We have our rural population with the community colleges that are spread out and serve really a different role than a lot of other places. So without going into too much detail, 60-20-20 would, or yeah, 60-20-20 would be nice, but it's not there.
Okay, further questions? All right, thank you. Public comment still open. Anyone else? Anyone else? Anyone join us online? Okay. Public comments closed. What's your pleasure, committee? Bill's been moved. Is there a second? We got it second. Okay. I'm sure we have 4 or 5 or 10 amendments here coming at us. Who wants to be first?
Oh, nobody else does.
Co-Chairman Scott.
Mr. Chairman, first, let me say I've got a 9% to 6% amendment drafted. I do not intend to offer that. Mr. Chairman, on the last page, page 11, there's amendment been distributed that puts in a nominal increase to the endowment fund and $1,000 each of the next 2 years at the end of the fiscal year. I would offer that amendment, and if I get a second, I'll explain why.
Okay, moved and seconded.
Mr. Chairman, the original purpose of this bill was to try to start catching the size of the scholarship up with the inflation in the costs that have occurred. You heard roughly 90% originally, down to 60%. It varies some by depending which scholarship level, but the Hathaway has been losing its effectiveness gradually because of this. And partly the program has been successful beyond the wildest dreams of those of us who put it in. And when you look at what's happened, it's enabled quite a number of kids, Mr. Chairman, who were going to have to stop at the community college, go on to the university and get a bachelor's degree, and a number of other kids who would not have gone beyond high school to go to the community college and get either an associate's degree or a certificate that's job related. And it has been very valuable to the ordinary students of the state. And what I want to do is use the opportunity, if we have a big surplus, as we think we will, one-time money, to put the Hathaway on the table, to start catching that up. I've done some very crude calculations that suggest to me that if we manage to get it up to 150 million or so addition, and assume that the yield we get out of it is proportional to the size of the account, we'll get back close to that 90%. And I don't want to be held to that calculation. I don't trust my math just yet. But there is some figure in there, and that's about where it probably is. And so I'm asking to put a nominal appropriation in so that we've got this in the mix of possibilities for using one-time funds.
That's as close as your crystal ball's gonna get you right there,
Right
right?
there.
Okay.
Question.
Question's been called for. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Amendment carries. Do you have more amendments? Anyone else? Representative Harshman.
Just, Mr. Chairman, just to fix that on page 3, that shall and may issue on the investment in pool A. And okay, on line 4, page 3, right after XVI, insert or add subject to Wyoming statute 21-16-1302A, which is the section right below it. We're on the same page. And then, Mr. Chairman, the next part would be on line 20, change the may to shall. So I think that, and that's what staff recommends here.
Any questions?
Okay, now they're telling me not to shall and the may. So leave that second part, scratch that second part. I'm just
Okay,
trying to be a good follow direction.
that was in the form of a motion, right?
That's a motion. So really it's on line 4, it's a motion.
All right, is there a second? Okay, seconds all over the place. All right. Question been called for. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The amendment carries.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative or Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your packet, I think you have an amendment. That's the Ellis Amendment. And this doesn't alter the bill too much. But when we first looked at it in the interim, you'll see like some of the dollar amounts that we proposed. For example, on page 5, line 17 was $885. We heard testimony that it's better to have a number that's divisible by 12. And so what this amendment did or would do, Mr. Chairman, is as close as I could get to being around those dollars from the initial draft, picked dollar amounts that were divisible by 12 and also included in there some clarifying language. So it's broken out by per semester hour. So you'll see additional language that clarifies not more than, for example, $74 per semester hour and not more than $888. And that's for the whole semester or for the 12 semesters. That way in future years, when legislators look at these bills and maybe want to adjust these dollar amounts, they'll know or be clued in that if they do them in by semester hour to adjust these amounts by numbers that are divisible by 12. So feel free to look at the rest of the amendment. As I said, I would try to keep it as close as I could to what we first saw in the interim. So that's the motion.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. The numbers, I think work well. I just have a concern of an unintended consequence with the word for the semester. Because there was the challenge of making it compliant with summer term and J term. There was some gymnastics done a number of years ago to get it to work. And I'm wondering if this might cause challenges for that. And honestly, I don't remember exactly how we count the J term, whether it's part of a semester in the calculation. Maybe Kyle can help come from behind the pillar. I just want to make sure that we're not breaking that somehow with these words for the semester.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I might ask LSO if they can help shine a light on that.
Okay, LSO,
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I think that that was added. It's necessary because of the changes that identify the per semester hour amount in each of the scholarship awards. And my recollection is, and I'm trying to confirm this in statute, which would be the appropriate thing to do, is that academic term does include summer school or the January, but just not for purposes of counting against your overall scholarship eligibility, the 8 terms, the 8 semester hours.
Co-Chairman Scott.
Mr. Chairman, what I'm going to suggest is we adopt this amendment and ask the University of Wyoming and the Community College Commission to look carefully at that language and make sure we didn't mess something up. And if we did, to authorize the Legislative Service Office to work with the university and the Community College Commission to come up with clarifying language for the first committee.
That seems like a reasonable solution.
That's
Anyone
a
else?
Friendly amendment, you betcha.
Any amendment? Okay. Question's been called. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. The amendment carries. Senator Ellis, do you have more or is that, yeah, okay. Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, mine are more complicated. So, Mr. Chairman, if you would go to Summers number 2, which is the apprenticeship scholarship, and I'm going to have to do some altercations on it. But I'm going to give you the general gist of it. As we heard testimony, I guess I'm bringing up a larger concern I have, and that is that the Hathaway does not always probably aid those that are in certificate programs and CTE programs maybe as well as it could. And maybe there's not as much availability to some students as others. And so as we heard about apprenticeship scholarships or apprenticeship programs and we looked at the fact that there are some in community colleges that that I wanted to make sure that we tried to find a way to apply the Hathaway to those apprenticeship scholarships. And I guess what I'll do is I'll run down through this amendment. And so basically it goes into section 1 and it creates 2116-1313, which is Hathaway Apprenticeship Scholarship. And any student is eligible to receive a Hathaway Apprenticeship Scholarship to pursue a registered apprenticeship program offered by a Wyoming community college who meets the following qualifications. The student meets the criteria under 2116-303. The student has successfully completed curriculum established 2116-1307E, which I think that's the curriculum underneath the provisional. I pretty much tried to apply the provisional opportunity scholarship to this. So Romanet 3, you'll notice, is the GPA and the and basically the language that's used in the provisional, which is either a 30 on a college entrance examination or a qualifying cumulative score on a career tech aptitude test as determined by the department. So that's all in the provisional opportunity. I think this is very much a similar deal. And then the amount of the Hathaway Apprenticeship Scholarship shall be, I just put in $885, which at the time was 1 semester of the provisional. Now we've heard testimony that we know that there's programs out there that go on for 8 semesters at about $800. And so I'll make a change to that. And basically what I would say there just in general is the amount of the Hathaway Apprentice Scholarship shall be consistent with the provisional Hathaway. And that way it can be consistent in its money. And then the Department of Education shall establish by rule criteria and an approval process for eligible registered apprenticeship programs, which is, you would want to do that. And then D, a student who receives the Hathaway Apprenticeship Scholarship shall not be able to, and I put in there, I think this would be important, to concurrently receive the Hathaway Provisional. This says to receive the Hathaway Provisional at all. And I thought about that a little bit. And maybe we can, tweak this as we go, if there's any interest in this program. Is, what happens if you did have a 1-year apprenticeship program and that individual went ahead and got that, but wanted to also go into a community college and do an advanced credential on something else and still wanted to use some Hathaway money that would be left over. And so I kind of want to figure out how to mold that concept in there. But that's kind of the idea, Mr. Chairman. And so I would move that, and certainly I'll be willing to discuss changes. So particularly on subsection B, the amount of the Hathaway Apprenticeship Scholarship, instead of just $885, should be consistent with the provisional Hathaway, provisional opportunity Hathaway. That's my idea. So, Mr. Chairman, that's.
All right, do we get a second? Second. Okay, discussion.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I kind of like this. But I am a little concerned. It does put a second subject in this bill. The rest of the bill is concerned with the finances, the size of the awards, and the size of the endowment and how we're going to manage the funds. This is creating a new program. Sometimes I don't think it's enough a second subject to get us in constitutional trouble, but it might be enough of one to collect enemies to both approaches and add them together and make it more difficult to pass the bill. I'm wondering if this might be better done as a private bill that Representative Summers could sponsor and a bunch of the rest of us could co-sponsor.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And certainly I can go that route if the committee chooses and if they feel like it jeopardizes the rest of the deal. Obviously, I would like to get it as a committee bill. And so that's why you're seeing this. I think it fit in with the topic of the Hathaway and how to move the Hathaway forward. And I think some of that is funding the Hathaway at a better amount. And some of it is looking at how we might be able to tweak the Hathaway to find more CTE opportunity. It's up to the group.
Hey. Representative Harshman, you have an opinion. I see you over there studying that thing pretty hard.
No, not really. My question though really is, what are you trying to solve? I mean, how is this different really than? I mean, why can't a student right now who qualifies for a provisional do this apprenticeship program? They can't? Is that what you're telling me?
It's my understanding that they can't because some of these, and maybe Tanya or Matt can help me out, but it has to do with, is it the credentialing or something? Tanya, help me out. I mean, we studied this a little bit.
LSO, weigh in.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers and Representative Harshman, I think some of the feedback that Representative Summers got from the institutions for these apprenticeship programs was that they're not measured on a semester basis. That they begin and sort of there's no means of measuring satisfactory academic progress. And that's why it is the one-time appropriation, because you essentially pay that fee up front. But I'm certainly not an expert. I just have been copied on a couple of emails on the subject.
Senator Ruffles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What about credit towards degree programs? that might come into play here based on the way that we wrote. I don't think you can do remedial courses using Hathaway. I'm not certain of that, but I feel like that's accurate. So perhaps that was another problem, is if these are not degree credits, but towards a credential, could that have been a problem, Representative?
Mr. Chairman, I think what we had identified is what Tanya said, and I couldn't remember it, is the fact that some of these apprenticeship programs aren't based on a semester basis. And, you know, unless somebody, community college guy has maybe some answers, so.
Okay, would you like to weigh in, please? Come forward.
Exec. Deputy exec.
Ben's gonna enlighten us here.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Ben Moritz, Deputy Director, that community college guy. Yes, that's exactly the problem. Some of the apprenticeship programs are for credit and some are not for credit. And because of the definition in Hathaway about the satisfactory progress being based on a credit hour, that was the issue. And in fact, it can vary within an institution. I was just reviewing a couple things. At LCCC, for instance, they have HVAC and plumbing both through the DOL formal apprenticeship programs. One is for credit, one is not. There's a lot of different reasons why they do that. It's not just to irritate all of us. There's very good reasons, but that is one of the issues that I think you probably had discovered.
Representative Summers.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I guess I would ask you the question on the amount. Let's just assume that maybe I've got a chance here. You know, what is the appropriate way to fund this based upon your knowledge of the existing apprenticeship programs? Because if it's not on it still would be on a semester basis. It's just not on a credit basis. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Summers, some of them are on clock hours instead of on that semester basis as well. So to call back to the Wyoming Works language, which allowed for both for credit programs or non-credit that utilize that clock hour measurement device. It could be possible that if you added a so many credit hours is equal to so many clock hours for approved programs or something like that. On my quick overview of the reading, I would say that may take all of the apprenticeship programs and allow them to be folded into Hathaway as long as you could equate clock hours into credit hours. That may be a larger change to Hathaway than anyone is comfortable with, but that probably would address most of the issues. And as far as the overall amount, the apprenticeship programs do vary quite a bit, although the provisional level of Hathaway should deal with most of them. Apprenticeship programs tend to have more employer support. And also there's a DOL and Department of Workforce Service funds that can supplement those as well. So the Casper program that was called out earlier by my friends at WACT is probably one of the pricier ones of the programs listed. Most of them are going to come in under that.
Thank you.
Senator Office.
All of these programs, though, and the intent of this legislation or this proposed amendment, as I understand it, the funds still always flow to one of our colleges. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, yes, the funds for these two. I'm trying to think of an exception. There's an electrical program through the union in Casper. And I believe that they do work with Casper College, but the funding for that comes from the union themselves. So that might be an exception. And I'm not aware of other union supplied ones, but there might be. And it's possible that the in-classroom instruction is provided by the union instead of the colleges. But because the union tends to pay for those, that would be, the funding through Hathaway wouldn't be necessary.
Okay, anyone else? Yes, Representative Newsom.
So I'm wondering, I'm fully in support of this, but I'm wondering if the, maybe part of the solution is on the second page of your amendment where it defines the certificate and adds the approved registered apprentice program. So my question is, why wouldn't a student be able to apply for a scholarship at whatever level they are eligible for and use that scholarship to pay for a certificate, including the registered apprentice program? Do we have to create a whole nother category, or can we just redefine what's eligible for the expenses to be paid for with, because what I'm seeing is, and I find this with CTE and I find it annoying, is that we assume that these students are not academically qualified for anything else, but they are. I mean, I know kids going into welding that have a 4.0, and they should be eligible for the honor scholarship, that amount of money, no matter how they choose to use those funds, whether it's for a apprenticeship program. I know I pay my plumber more than I pay my doctor at this point. So, so I think that by creating this in assumption that these students would only be eligible for provisional is wrong.
Okay,
Tanya had a
Tanya?
hand up.
Mr. Chairman, just a couple of notes on that. I know it seems like it's a simple amendment and that we can simply change one definition. I think that was the initial email that we received in the request. But if you look at the architecture of the Hathaway Scholarship Program, it is built on a per semester allocation with satisfactory academic progress mixed into that equation. When you're talking about an apprenticeship program, generally, as we've understood the program, it's sort of a one-time fee to complete the program. So it doesn't readily, it's not a one-to-one transfer for the honors or the provisional or any of the other scholarships. And so in discussion of the issue, it really is appropriate if you're gonna do a separate program for apprenticeship to have a separate statutory section for it, rather than trying to shoehorn it into the other statutes, which really weren't built on that premise.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, there's probably enough complications that I can back out of this. I'm not going to back out of the idea, but maybe you and I can work on that bill and we'll just get it done that way. There's too much cleanup needs done at this point, so I'll back away from it.
I totally agree. So that's been withdrawn?
And so, Mr. Chairman, I have another one that's just as controversial probably. But we just well get them all out there.
All right.
So, Mr. Chairman, the Summers one. The other thing that I haven't really liked is the fact that you, if you look on the Summers one, under 21-16-1301 definitions, basically line 15, 14, and 15. Satisfactory academic progress means completing at least before it was 6 semester hours per semester if enrolled for less than 12 semester hours. So in other words, you know, if you were a part-time student, you had to still be enrolled in 6 hours. And I realize maybe that's only 2 classes. But the fact of the matter is, I don't know why we're going to deny participation in the Hathaway to a child that comes out of high school that maybe only can grab 1 class a semester. And so this was my attempt to basically bring this down to a semester hour by semester hour payment and not make that 6 hours the threshold.
Is that a motion?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I will make that motion and run through the whole thing, but that's generally where I'm at.
Okay, do I have a second?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to second for discussion.
Okay,
And Mr. Chairman, a concern I have here is a concern with a lot of the things we do with Hathaway and its overall structure. And it's the reason why really the next bill we should pass. What a penalty they would have if they only took one class a semester based on the structure of the Hathaway. We don't let them keep the rest of the money. So they'll take one class, they'll get a few $100s and they'll burn the rest, and then they won't be able to recoup it. So I don't disagree with you, satisfactory academic progress. This is not necessarily a good approach. You're absolutely right. But the unintended consequence of doing what you said almost seems as bad, where you're giving them this opportunity to take only one class and then they leave a bunch of money on the table and maybe they don't know that that's what's happening and they won't get their Hathaway. So I totally agree. They're sort of damned if they do, damned if they don't on this. If they're the person that you just described, they don't have a good scenario. Vote for the next bill.
Go ahead.
So, Mr. Chairman, and I don't know, how many credit hours are in different credential programs, but they're not built and they're not designed like a university or an associate's degree. And it may be that student is only going to do this, do 3 hours a semester for 4 semesters part-time. And why would we deny him? Why would we deny him his Hathaway?
Okay. Anyone else? Go ahead.
Just to weigh back, one more point on that. I'll support it because Representative Summers is absolutely right. The system right now is punitive when it doesn't need to be, but it just shows a glaring problem with the system that individual that you are raising has a perfectly reasonable life circumstance that needs to take advantage of this, and we are going to take away half their money for doing it that way. But better than without it, so I'll be an aye.
Okay.
Chairman.
Representative Conley.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And me too, although Representative Summers, originally I'm thinking to myself, the only kid this is really going to help is the kid who actually has accelerated their graduation and got to their 8th semester and only needed one more class. And they would have needed to take at least 2 in order to get that one class paid for. You've given us a scenario, honestly, that I think I can't imagine how it exists, where a kid is only taking a class a semester for 4 semesters and ends up with something meaningful, but honestly has burned through the possibility of an enormous Hathaway with honestly less than a semester's worth of classes. I'll vote for it because of how you considered that class equaling something. But in all honesty, it makes things even more complicated. The next bill is the way to take care of all of this.
Okay. Anyone else? Question been called. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay? No. Chairs in doubt? All the ayes, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The nays? The nays were very loud, but they didn't get the vote. So the motion passes. Okay. Any other amendments?
Question on the bill.
Question on the bill. Roll call, please.
On 22 LSO 0104 as amended, Senator Biteman. Senator Ellis. Senator Rothfuss. Senator Salazar.
No.
Representative Andrew. Representative Connolly. Representative Harshman. Representative Nyman. Representative Newsom. Representative Obermueller. Representative Summers. Co-Chairman Scott. Chairman Paxton. 12 aye, 2 nay.
Okay, the motion passes. It looks like we are down to the Hathaway Lump Sum Merit Scholarship. Tanya, you want to walk us through that?
Mr. Chairman, Tanya Heitrick, Legislative Service Office. I'll be presenting 22 LSO 0163 Working Draft 5. Recall at your last meeting, you requested staff resurrect a bill that the legislature considered making the Hathaway Scholarship lump sum awards and eliminating many of the many of the required provisions regarding eligibility on a per semester basis. Just walking through the bill, page 2, line 8 through page 3, line 14. This amends the applicable definitions as well as adding 2 new definitions required to operationalize a lump sum scholarship. Those 2 new definitions can be found on lines 6 through 9, which is remaining scholarship amount, and lines 9 through 14, total scholarship amount. Moving on, page 4, line 8. This increases the period of Hathaway Scholarship eligibility from 4 years as it currently exists in the program to 20 years from the date of your high school graduation. Lines 17 through 21, these are conforming amendments required to allow use of the scholarship up to 20 years after graduation, and it eliminates the number of semesters for scholarship eligibility. Page 5, lines 1 through 4, these are conforming amendments. And then one item to note as a staff comment, you'll note on lines 9 through 21 on page 5, this scholarship as drafted by the legislature and resurrected for purposes of today's meeting does not change the use by home-based educational programs or private schools. The limits on their application and use of the scholarship remain intact. Moving on to page 5 and on to page 6. Page 6, lines 7 through 9 modifies the Opportunity Scholarship to allow for a lump sum payment of $6,720. Line 17 through 20 modifies the Performance Scholarship to be a and I should say not a lump sum payment, that's a misuse of words, but up to an amount of $10,080. Later in the bill, there's a provision that allows for students to elect how they'd like to see the disbursement of funds. So it's not a lump sum necessarily as far as the payment goes. Page 7, lines 4 and 5 modifies the Honor Scholarship, allowing up to $13,440. And page 7, lines 7 through 14 is a conforming amendment to eliminate reference to semester hour limits. Page 8, lines 9 through 12 modifies the amount for the provisional opportunity to allow a payment up to $3,360. Page 8, lines 13 through 20 are conforming amendments. Page 8 on the bottom of page 8 and then on to page 9, 10 and 11. These modifications are to the need-based scholarship to account for a per semester allocation in the need-based context, because that is a different type of award as opposed to the previous awards that we've discussed. Page 11, line 10 through page 12, line 7. This modifies the success curriculum to eliminate references to yearly annual requirements. That statute actually has a number of references to different tiers of success curriculum requirements based on the date of high school graduation. Page 12, line 9 through page 13, line 8 creates a new subsection C that allows students to elect a one-time payment. This is a provision or allows them to utilize a portion. It requires the institutions to calculate the remaining award. You recall that that's a definition that was added, and to certify the balance that is due from the state treasurer. Page 13, lines 17 through 20 prohibits the transfer of scholarships to anyone else.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So Tanya, just help me understand on 12 and 13. So so basically it's a lump sum. But what regulates this, and more or less, what regulates the spend? In other words, you can't purchase the Taj Mahal like, where you're living, right? I mean, what's going to regulate how much what you can use this scholarship for? What regulates what you can use the amount of money for? You know?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, I don't think this changes the nature of how the scholarship is utilized. It changes the nature of the payment for the scholarship. And the provisions that you're noting on lines 12, the new subsection C, that governs the student's ability to elect how that payment is made to the eligible institution. So whether they decide to use the amount, the entire amount for the first semester, because as you've all discussed, the purchasing power of the Hathaway has decreased. And so that's one option if a student chose to do that, or they could choose to allocate it in the way that the scholarship currently operates with a per semester amount. It really would be determined by the student.
So Mr. Chairman, so Tanya, it would be cost determined by the institution. So for example, it could be fees, it could be housing that the institution provides, it could be tuition, but it can't be like off-site housing the institution doesn't have any knowledge of. It's all reined into what the institution can provide. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, this bill doesn't change what the Hathaway is authorized to pay for. It changes the amount and when those payments can be made.
Okay.
Senator Roth's first.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And on that point, it's my understanding, although I don't think it's explicit in what we have in front of us, I think it's elsewhere in statute. I think it's only for tuition and fees. I don't think you can use it for any room and board or even books. I think it's only tuition and fees at one of our institutions. And I actually think it's also only for credit courses towards a degree program as drafted, probably.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers and Senator Rothfuss, I can get those citations for you, but those provisions are not amended.
Someone over here had their hand up. Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it's been a couple of days since I've read this, but help me. This does leave out homeschool students' ability. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, it doesn't leave them out, but they're not allowed to use it within the 20-year period.
That's all I need to know. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
totally an oversight. I was on the working group that drafted it. No intent of that. So we'll just fix it. Sorry about that.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was my question, is where this came from. I don't remember us voting on having LSO draft a bill. And so I just wondered who was bringing this, and I was just curious, and I may not be remembering.
Mr. Chairman, the history of this was the Wyoming Tomorrow Task Force drafted 3 pieces of legislation. We worked the one earlier on the Wyoming Tomorrow Scholarship. This was another product of that Wyoming Tomorrow Task Force that was worked on for a couple of years. And again, I don't know how we missed that. So my apologies for that not being in there, but this has been worked and worked through that task force.
Okay, go ahead.
And Mr. Chairman, I would add that that's certainly an amendment that can be made. I think that the other item too was the high school equivalency certificate as well. I apologize that I lost my place, but I think I found it. Page 13, lines 17 through 20 prohibits the transfer of scholarships. Moving on to page 14, lines 10 through page 15, line 12. This modifies the Hathaway Expand Scholarship. There's some interrelation or interreferences between the Hathaway Expand and the other Hathaway scholarships. And so these are, in a sense, conforming amendments required as a result of amending those. On the bottom, of page 15, lines 18 through 21, this is also a conforming amendment necessary within the Wyoming Works program. There again is an interrelation and a reference to 2116-1305 AI, capital A. And as a result of the modifications in the bill, it's required that we call out the specific amount on that line. That's the same can be said about page 16, lines 3 through 5. That's a conforming amendment required as a result of the modification of the Hathaway Scholarship. Section 2, page 16 through page 30 of the bill. Those are the provisions that are necessary to repeal as a result of the contents of the bill. I won't go through each one of those. You can go ahead and note those yourself. A lot of them deal with eligibility requirements, satisfactory academic progress, and a per semester award basis. And then page
Chairman.
30.
Mr. Chairman. Can you,
Representative Newsom, go ahead.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you explain to me why we're repealing all of these? Are they redone within the structure of this bill that I didn't notice? So these eligibility requirements and everything that we're repealing?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, as I sort of indicated in discussion of the Hathaway apprenticeship program, the architecture of the Hathaway Scholarship is built on a per semester award. It's also built on satisfactory academic progress with limitations about how many semesters you can use it and how long you're eligible for it. All of those provisions have been repealed in the sections noted here. So satisfactory academic progress on page 17, that's no longer necessary. There is no academic requirement associated with receipt of the Hathaway Scholarship. So you can continue to receive it or not, or take your allocation up front. The same with the eligibility requirements. Many of the eligibility requirements have been repealed from 2116-1303, and I can't speak to the policy decisions made to operationalize these or what the discussion of the task force was. I can only speak to the legal ramifications for the deletion of the statutory sections. Page 20, lines 4 through 13, lines 23 through 32, 41 through 44, and on to page 21. These are the per semester allocations, or in the event that you were attending less than 6 hours, that allocation. The scholarship eligibility and availability under this program is not tied to your semester hours or to the semesters that you attend. You get the amount regardless of whether you attend to the Representative Summers, 0.1 hour, or whether you attend, and get your doctorate degree. Representative Newsom, do you want me to go through each one, or?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Tanya, I don't know that that's necessary, but my concern is as we repeal under 2116-1303, the US citizenship, that they're not eligible. So we've apparently in this are repealing those things. They don't have to have complied with selective service. Doesn't matter if they're in default of a student loan. So I guess my confusion is these eligibility requirements are totally being repealed with no corresponding eligibility requirements in this new piece of legislation. And if that's true, and maybe those of you that were on the task force can shed some light. Thank you.
Senator Office.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So the discussion on the task force behind the whole legislation was there's an awful lot of bureaucracy in Hathaway, a lot of restrictions, a lot of thou shalts and thou shalt nots that lead to folks not having the opportunity to actually take advantage of it. The individual that Representative Summers raised a few minutes ago that needs to take one course per semester for a few years, that's their best path. The individual that really just wants to get a welding certificate in 2 years, but has an honors level that Representative Newsom discussed. This is not made for them. The Hathaway is really structured in a way that you will go to 8 semesters of school to get your reward, regardless of what you're interested in, as well as really regardless of whether you can afford it, because at the provisional and opportunity level, you don't have enough money from the Hathaway to afford tuition. So it's a struggle. The concept here, and this is something that Co-Chairman Paxton and I talked about 7 years ago or something like that for the first time, is why do we have to get in the way of Wyoming high school graduates, insert ourselves in their decision-making processes and tell them what things we want them to do and what things we don't want them to do with their Hathaway scholarship? At the end of the day, they've earned a certain amount of money. They're a Wyoming high school graduate and they did something in high school to earn that Hathaway. Let's just let them choose their own educational path from that time forward in Wyoming institutions. That's like kind of the one requirement that's left, is the money needs to be going to a college or the university. And it's for tuition and fees, so that you're not buying yourself the Taj Mahal, but you're buying yourself your educational opportunity. We put a 20-year timeline in, and again, Representative Salazar and anybody else, or excuse me, Senator Salazar and anybody else that's concerned about it, we assumed it was all students equal, and that was clearly an oversight. So 20 years from your graduation, this is something you earned. If you want to go on a mission, if you want to go into the military for 10 years, if you want to do any other life experience, we didn't know why you should unearn your Hathaway right, because you're a graduate from a Wyoming university. And at the end of the day, the requirements for all of the eligibility limitations, if folks want to put those back on, we can do that. But what we were really trying to do was just streamline it and say, you graduated from a Wyoming high school, you did a great job and you earned a scholarship. We're going to give you that scholarship and we're not going to tell you how to use it. We're not going to micromanage your life. We're not going to decide whether or not you have an appropriate life circumstance and make you have more skin in the game or whatever the heck else the case is. You earned it. We're going to give you a debit card with a certain number of educational dollars on that debit card. Get yourself educated. And if you need to go away for 5, 10 years, or if you get married and have a family and this is not the time for you to get your education, you need to work right now, I don't see why we should care. So it very much is just oriented towards recognizing that we're all individuals. We don't have a life story that fits perfectly the mold of Hathaway. And we want to provide flexibility, which is something that the task force and the folks that we had provide testimony and work on this legislation, everyone was kind of enthusiastically behind the fact that giving that flexibility to our people rather than bureaucracy to our people just seemed like a good way to restructure the Hathaway. So it's removing government, it's removing limitations, it's providing scholarship opportunities regardless of life circumstances and regardless of interests for the folks that are Wyoming graduates from Wyoming high schools. And I think it's a heck of a lot better. It just solves all the problems that we've been raising as well, what about this? What about this? All those what abouts go away. Just do what's best for you.
Well said. Okay.
Thank you. And I was not disparaging the intent of this bill at all. I was just, Senator Ellis and I have had a bad experience with some repealers. in recent history. So we are very aware that repealers do make a difference. Thank you so much.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I'm too soon. Way too soon.
Do you want to amend that?
Yes.
We can put it in.
Okay, further comments for Tanya before we move on? Okay,
Mr. Chairman, the last item is that it is the delayed effective date of July 1st of 2025.
okay,
And Mr. Chairman, can I comment on that?
go ahead.
There's some transitional funding concerns, as well as the idea that when you apply for a Hathaway and when you're educated about the Hathaway program, there are a certain set of circumstances that you're expecting. And so we just sort of tried to make it cognizant of financial transition timeline and not wrapping everybody around the axle with the need to re-educate all of the students about how the Hathaway works. That was I don't know that 2025 was perfect, but that's the reason why there's a little bit of a delay there.
Okay. Anyone have any questions for Tanya before she's, okay, thank you. Anything else from the committee before we open up for public comment? Okay, we're open for public comment. We have anyone online?
No, sir, we don't.
Okay. Seeing no public comment, we will move to the bill. Yes, co-chairman.
Mr. Chairman. Well, you don't have a motion.
Oh, that's right. We don't have a motion. I thought you were going to make a motion. No. Okay, do we have a motion? So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Okay. Now, discussion.
On and against the bill. Mr. Chairman, I have major concerns with this bill. Frankly, the Hathaway was designed to help traditional kids going on to complete their education. I think there's a great deal of virtue in having the degrees completed relatively early. It help kids in the workplace and whatnot to do that, to have that degree. I think maybe some loosening of the requirements is appropriate, but going to a 20-year entitlement or anything close to that, I think is excessive. I am concerned that it will cause us to lose control of the Hathaway finances, as you will gradually build up a great big fund of people out there who didn't completely use their Hathaway and will come in, some of them at unpredictable intervals. And the longer it goes on, the more unpredictable our funding needs will become, the more we'll have to hold in more liquid reserves to cover that. And I don't think that's a good idea. Second, Mr. Chairman, the lack of public comment was quite instructive. This is a major change in the philosophy of the Hathaway. It's probably going to be expensive and reduce the amount available for scholarships. And we didn't get any reaction from the public, which says to me that virtually nobody is aware that it's there. So for all those reasons, I think this bill is, in addition to the homeschool problem and the problems with potentially repealing some of the eligibility requirements, I don't think this bill is ready for prime time, and parts of it I don't think ever ought to be ready for prime time, but against the bill.
Senator Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have some similar thoughts, but I will just tell the joint committee that I couldn't even begin to support this bill without the inclusion of the homeschool element. So without that being fixed, I would be a no as well.
Okay. Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know whether I'm for or against, but I want to, the idea of the traditional student is going away. And because society is changing, jobs are changing, and the whole structure of things. I think it, you know, it's been a while since I've been on the education committee, but in my prior stint, I know we looked at some of the projections of where the needs were and what the workforce was going to look like well into the future. I think it was a Harvard study, maybe about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. And really what it talked about is not a great need in Wyoming or many places for your traditional bachelor's and master's degrees, but a lot of it was post-secondary and it was certificates or other types of things. And I think we're even seeing this in high tech now, right? Not all the degrees are in, you know, I was educated as an electrical engineer, but now a lot of the techies are not engineers. It's more of a tech thing. And it's not the same structure. And so I think we need, you know, maybe this isn't ready, but we need to figure out how to move the Hathaway to where our students are going to be in the next 25 years. And it's not going to be the same place where it was the last 25 years. And we want to be inclusive, which this is very inclusive, right? Are there some unintended consequences in this bill as it's written? Maybe so, you know, maybe so. But I just offer this to the committee. If it's not this bill now, we need to think how we're going to move this program into the future because it's a changing workplace. It's a changing student.
Okay, anyone else? Yes. Representative Overmiller first.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just need to kind of understand how the numbers would work better. I mean, initially, if you're qualified for the scholarship and you've earned a certain amount, accounting for it over 2 years or over 20 years, that dynamic really doesn't change. Particularly if you're investing it in over time, you would even have the potential for growth to stay up with inflation over time. So I'm not, you know, just from an accounting standpoint, maybe I don't understand how the funding really works, but I don't see that as a difficult proposition to track the money in this, or that it changes the amount available for other scholarships.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ralphus.
Just on that point, I agree with Representative Overmiller that, and we discussed the cash flow concept. We originally said we didn't care when. And in fact, the first draft concept was don't put a timeline on it. Why do we care that it's even within 20 years? And honestly, the reason we came back with it just was to carry the budget. It was just to have an accounting window that would eventually close so that you would know when your obligations were terminated and wouldn't have to keep track for an infinite amount of time. But in terms of the cash flow concept, Representative Overmiller is exactly right. This is not going to change anything realistically. You're going to be taking less out under some circumstances and paying more out under other circumstances. You'd expect some balance depending on when people utilize it, and you'll end up with a steady state. You'll have a little bit of fluctuation. We have a little bit of fluctuation right now. Funds that aren't getting used are in the pool A, assuming we pass the other piece of legislation. So you end up making additional revenue. So you do understand it exactly as we understand it. From a cash flow standpoint, it doesn't make any difference in the long run, except for there's some possibility that maybe you have people that right now wouldn't use their Hathaway because their life circumstances preclude them from using their Hathaway. And under these circumstances where we give them more flexibility, maybe they would take advantage of their Hathaway. And if our policy objective is to ensure that we save money by denying people access to their earned Hathaway, I don't know that that's a noble objective. So if the way we're going to save money is by putting in place a policy, or that we already have in place actually, that excludes certain people based on their life circumstances and interests, it's not really a noble objective, but we can do that. It may save us a few bucks. So I guess the unintended consequence there is that we might help some people.
I had somebody over here, Representative Conley.
Thank Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm in favor of this bill and actually really strongly. And I'll just tell you to start with, when we first started talking about this a couple of years ago, I'd go into my classroom with students and I talked to them about it for a couple minutes before class started, and start with, we're considering changes to the Hathaway. And all of a sudden there is abject fear because the Hathaway is so important. It's so important to Wyoming kids in going to school. And I said, one of the things that we're considering is making it a lump sum that you then get to manage over the period of time of getting a degree. And all of a sudden, their concern kind of dissipated. And I can't tell you how many of them have fallen into, and I'm going to encourage everyone to read all of these repealers, and including the statutes that they reference, because of all of the obligations that students have to maintain their scholarship each and every semester. And I can't tell you how many students, even at the honors level, honestly need to drop out and have dropped out. And then they have lost their scholarship for that semester, right? This gives some opportunities for them to, like, for us to go back to that idea again, behind what were we doing on that task force? What did we want to see accomplished? And it was honestly for more post-secondary educational opportunities. What do we have in place now? And how can we move it forward? And honestly, we just spent hours with establishing the Wyoming Tomorrow Scholarship for those who are 25 and older, right? We did really good work with that. This one here is saying, all right, we have the Hathaway in place right now, but honestly, it's not working the way that it was envisioned. What was it, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, Mr. Co-Chairman? 17, all right, 17 years ago. And we've learned a lot. And that's why we have all of these kind of repealers in here, because we needed to change it and tweak it along the way. But what we've learned is that, as was just said, students' life circumstances change from the time that they're honestly 14 years old and start doing the Hathaway Success Curriculum. They do. And we want to recognize that and honor it. We also recognize that the Hathaway, even at the honors level, doesn't pay for college. It just doesn't. But that lump sum makes a difference. And that lump sum, not only for the honors kids, but for the provisional and opportunity kids, the difference between $885 or whatever it is per semester and that lump sum of a couple of $1,000 makes a difference. 885, not so much. So let's give those kids the opportunity to manage what they have earned through that successful completion of high school. That's what this does. It simply says you need to perform during high school, right? With that Hathaway Success Curriculum. And if you do, we are no longer going to tell you, honestly, every 3 months, what you need to do to continue earning that money, right? That's what this does. I think it could be a real game changer. I think it could keep kids in Wyoming. And if a kid needs to drop out for whatever for 3 years, so be it. They're not going to lose the Hathaway that they worked so hard to get when they were 15 and 16 years old. That's what this does. With that, I'm in favor.
Okay, thank you. Was it Representative Obermueller? Did you have a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to dismiss Senator Scott's reservations about this too, because there's a couple pieces that over time will have to be worked out. One is kind of the actuarial picture of this, of how the money is actually used over time. And the other is you have this pool of money that's building up. And when there's pools of money out there, it can get grabbed for other purposes, backfill some other fund. You know how this works here. And pretty soon it's an unfunded liability instead of a funded liability. So I'm going to vote for this, but I think over time, as we move forward with this, we're going to have to backfill some of these to make sure that the program is solid. Thank you.
Okay. Other comments? Yes, Representative Newsom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm in favor of this, but we do need to fix the homeschool GED provision. So I would like to propose an amendment. And I don't know where it goes or how it goes, and I'll let LSO figure that out. But I would like to propose an amendment that allows for homeschool students and GED students to be eligible under this program as they are under the regular Hathaway program.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Discussion on the amendment. Question on, been called on the amendment. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Amendment is carried. Back on the bill. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, on page 17 in the repealers, under 2116-303, and it's kind of hard to tell if that's a subsection C or a subsection E, but it basically, a student is not eligible for a scholarship under this article if all of that was struck. It's an E, so I would like to bring all of E back into place.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, can you identify that section again? I missed it.
So it's on page 17. It's under the staff comment, and it's under the repealers. And it would be to bring in 2116-1303E back into the bill, so it would not be repealed. So that section, and that is, a student is not eligible if he's not a US citizen or a permanent resident. Yeah. And I'm just going to read the different ones. Has not I can't read the line struck through, but it completely complied with United States Selective Service. 3 is default on a federal title loan. 4 owes a refund. 5 incarcerated. 6 has been convicted of a felony. 7 does not otherwise qualify under this section. So I'll bring all that back in. Now, realizing the Wyoming's tomorrow, we carved a lot of those out because we felt at that point they weren't applicable, but I would like to bring that all back in for now. So eliminate that repealer.
Okay. The amendment's been moved. Is there a second? Seconded. Discussion on the amendment. Sensing you're ready for the question, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The amendment is carried. Okay. Go ahead, Senator Office.
Yeah, on that, since it was brought back in, I just asked the Representative Summers if he wants to remove the Romanet 6, which he removed earlier. I think in his in the other program, which is the prior felony conviction, I think was removed. And I thought there was one other one that was removed. And I'm just throwing that out there for discussion. It's up to you, but I think it was the default of financial aid at the federal level. Those were the 2 that I think were removed the other time. If you wanted to mirror that, if not, no worries. It's up to you.
Mr. Chairman, certainly I think if you're going to increase this out to 20 years, then I think you do probably want to get rid of the felony, because one of the reasons somebody may have missed a period of time might have been that he was under a felony conviction. And so I would certainly support that. And in fact, I'll bring that motion to remove 6 from the eligibility requirements.
Okay, moved and seconded. Discussion on that amendment.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, co-chairman.
Mr. Chairman, on and against this motion. We're still talking, I think, primarily about a lot of the traditional students. And the felony makes sense here where it doesn't in some other places. Because if they are guilty of a felony, that's something they've done very recently at that age. And they really hasn't been time to prove that you aren't dealing with a hardened criminal, that somebody has been reformed and really deserving of having this kind of thing. So whereas I don't like to see felonies used as permanent disabilities. This is for most of them, very immediate after the conviction of the felony. That's recent criminal activity.
Okay, the comments,
Mr. Chairman,
go ahead.
I can think of any number of unfortunate circumstances where a young person commits a felony tragically and at his own fault. But should that deny him the ability to get educated and turn his life around? I don't think so. So on and for the amendment.
Question's been called. All in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay.
No.
Chairs in doubt? All in favor, please raise your hand. I see 8. All opposed? Okay, the motion is carried. Amendment is carried. Okay. Anything else? Back on the bill. Representative Harsh.
Mr. Chairman, on page 28, more of the repealers. Just want to talk about the success curricula. Really bottom of 28 and then 29 and over through line 17 on page 30. And so part of the goal of this, I think, of the Hathaway was also to encourage really high school work as well. I mean, that was the goal, to take more math and science, frankly. So I would propose that we do not repeal those, so that we strike this repealer 21-16-1307.
Okay, that form of a motion.
That is a motion.
Okay, for the amendment, there's second. Yes. You're up.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I don't think we repealed the success curriculum. I think this is a construction of single use versus multi-use where we repealed redundancies of it. So let's check in with staff. I'm pretty sure we didn't take out the success curriculum.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, and yes, the success curriculum still exists. These were time-limited provisions. If you look, I think it's like 2010, 2011. Those provisions that are being repealed.
It's literally a cleanup where this bill is being used as the vehicle for the cleanup. Success curriculum is entirely unchanged by this for the 4 levels.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, I was really hoping we would repeal the success curriculum. You know, and just my 5 seconds on this, I think the success curriculum has been a horrible driver of everything we do in K-12 and has had horrible outcomes. And that's all I'm going to say on that.
Okay. Anyone else?
It was a good 5 seconds so far.
Anyone else? Guess we're back on the bill, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Roth.
Thanks. Before we vote, I think we're done amending. I just asked everybody to kind of give some thought to back when you'd graduated from high school, given a choice between the 2 systems, the system that we have now and this as an alternative approach, which one you would have preferred, or if you have kids that were going to college or are going to college, which one you would prefer them to have. Because flexibility, I think it just benefits everybody's life circumstance. And I think that there's a lot more value that can be gleaned from having flexibility than the very rigid approach that we have now. So I hope you all will support this work by the task force.
Okay. Anything else? Yes, Representative Overmiller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple ticky-tacky amendments on page 23, line 38, 39. I believe the notwithstanding pieces are already gone. And so that paragraph should start with the, I believe, unless somebody sees it different than I do, but those paragraphs that are referred to in the notwithstandings are lined out at this point.
Is that a motion?
Yeah, I would move that amendment.
Okay, is there a second?
Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
Mr.
Paper
Chairman.
we're looking at.
If you look at page,
Staff?
yeah, Mr. Chairman and Representative Obermueller, if you look at page 7, lines 7 and 8, it's already taken care of in the conforming amendments.
Okay,
Okay, all right, thank you. I withdraw.
draw. Right. Anything else? Question has been called. Roll call.
On 22 LSO 0163 as amended, Senator Whiteman. Senator Ellis. Senator Rothfuss.
Aye.
Senator Salazar. Representative Andrew. Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown did leave a proxy vote of nay.
Okay.
Representative Connolly. Representative Harshman. Representative Nyman. Representative Newsom. Representative Obermueller. Representative Summers. Co-Chairman Scott.
No.
Chairman Paxton.
Aye.
8 aye, 6 nay.
Okay. What's that?
Get rid of it quick. Can't pass there.
All right,
Mr. Chairman,
yes,
on
Mr. Co-Chair.
on further business, I would ask the leave of the committee to allow the chairman to assign the bills to balance the workload appropriately.
Okay. Any objection? Without objection, we will proceed that way. Okay. Anything else for the good of the cause? It's 3:27, just past our break time.
We adjourn.
So it looks like we did some serious catch up today. Appreciate your cooperation in getting this done and have a safe trip back. Meeting is adjourned.
Excellent job, Mr. Chairman.